Welcome to Bat Therapy, mental health through the lens of comics and film. Be a fly on the wall or a bat in the cave, listening in on a friendship built out of a love for talking Batman, comics, and the everyday struggle to achieve mental health and happiness.
We're your hosts, clinical psychologist Dr. Amelia Brown and educator and comic aficionado Keeden Hopkins. Don't forget to follow us on YouTube and social media and find our Patreon at patreon.com/battherapy.
This podcast is about providing education and understanding and is not a replacement for mental health treatment or support. If you're needing help, go to bat-therapy.com for resources. All right, let's talk Echo.
Yeah, I'm excited about this. It was on my list of things to do, and I think it just kind of fell by the wayside. And so I ended up just binging this over the course of 2 days. I didn't realize it was only 5 episodes.
So I watched it already, and I didn't realize it was just 5 episodes.
Yeah.
And they're on the shorter end, too, in terms of...
Yeah.
They're like, what, 35, 40 minutes each?
Yeah, it was short. It was short and sweet, and it was basically like a spinoff about the character that was introduced in Hawkeye, Maya Lopez.
Yes.
Very different from her comic book counterpart.
I know zero about her comic book counterpart. So if you know stuff, I'm interested to hear.
So one of the big things that they do keep in is that in the comics she is deaf. She is deaf. I don't believe she's an amputee in the comics.
I think they updated that based on the actress.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah, that's great. That's awesome. Yeah, and I do think there's also a difference in her Native American tribe, like the background. I think they changed it. I think in the show, I believe it's Choctaw.
Yeah.
And in the comics, I think it's Blackfoot.
Okay. Interesting. I wonder why they changed that.
Yeah, I'm not sure, but I really did enjoy it. Also, I wonder if they changed it just because they actually filmed on a Choctaw reservation, I believe.
They did. So
Yeah.
Keeden and I were about to start recording. I went, wait, there's one more website I forgot to have up just in case. Because I was interested in what the Choctaw reaction to everything was. Because at least from the outside, being someone not of any indigenous background,
None?
I was like, this seems really awesome. This seems so culturally attuned. And but then I was like, let me look into this though, because how would I know?
Just make sure. Right.
Right. I don't want to be just some oblivious person over here.
Like, I thought this was great.
And then you find out like, no, this is terrible. But actually, people from the Choctaw Nation were integrated into the entire process of this.
Excellent.
To the point where there's actually a website, echo.choctawnation.com.
What?
And it actually, it has a lot of discussions about how they worked through the filming together, and has more stuff on their culture and other things. It's really cool. And it even is like they did things dubbed in their native tongue, and so use it as a way of hopefully encouraging the next generation to pick back up some of the language that was lost, if you can call it lost, if they were essentially forced to stop speaking it. Right. But yeah, it's really cool. It actually seems like they went about this in the right way, which is just so darn refreshing.
Right? Isn't it? It's like, oh wow,
so
look,
nice.
they did it correctly. They didn't, and so I really did enjoy it. But that was another thing in the comics. Couple things. She actually assumes the mantle of Ronin after Hawkeye does in the comics, and she ends up for a little while having the Phoenix Force. And what? So in the comics, they do all kinds of stuff. And I think in the comics they also don't do the thing where she channels her ancestors for powers. They didn't. Yeah, that wasn't a thing in the comics. And so they definitely did some changes, but I do think they still did a really good job, like, with her character, especially in the MCU. I I think she has a very, very interesting story. So the big thing, another big thing. Now, by the way, before we go on, this is going to spoil uh the Echo television series, which you can watch, I believe, on Disney Plus, and I believe it's on Hulu. So if you haven't seen it yet, and you want to try and give this episode a pause, keep it
And
paused, but come back to it.
yeah, and we get it. You're tired. A lot of us are tired. The
Yeah,
MCU threw a lot at us.
yeah.
We understand. I highly, highly recommend this show. Even if you're tired of the whole superhero stuff, because it gives off a very different vibe. And I mean, there's characters from the MCU, but you can get by without it. And it's
hmm
just a really interesting human piece.
Also, I'm not gonna lie, I enjoyed seeing a show not set in a huge city.
Yeah.
Like, it was
I
in
didn't
the
think about
middle
that,
of
but yeah.
yeah, it was in the middle of a small town in Oklahoma. I really,
Mhm.
yeah, I really did enjoy that aspect too. It felt like it was really a family show, because I mean, this was a
Yeah.
show about just one family, and it was her adoptive family in New York, of course, as
Mm,
well as her family here. Now,
yeah.
like I said, a couple differences between in the comics. What ends up happening is Kingpin does still kill her father, but
Mm.
it's directly, like he does it with his own hands.
Ah,
And the father's dying wish is, please raise my daughter. And
okay.
yeah, and
Interesting.
Fisk does so. And so the big difference in here is, like, in the TV show, she has this like thirst for uh vengeance, because as an adult her
Mm.
father is killed by Hawkeye's character, and it was all through like a setup. It got a little confusing, but still similar, except in the comics he adopted her from a very, very young age. She was very, yeah, she
Uh,
was young.
there's so
Which,
much cool stuff about the quick pause. So we recognize we're releasing this episode in early December. It's because sometimes we don't plan as far ahead as might be useful. But we wanted to do something for Native American Heritage Month.
yes,
And so this came to mind as something fairly recent that could be really cool to talk about, that hopefully would be something culturally appropriate, because unfortunately,
yes,
as we know, there's a lot of not so great references and things that we could pull from.
yes,
So that was November, which obviously it is not right now, but we did the best we could. We
yeah.
were so
It is.
close.
We're recording in November, and I was gonna
There
say,
you go.
if
That's
yeah,
fair.
yeah,
That is fair. See,
yeah.
y'all are just going back in time with us to November. Time
We had
travel.
to
You're welcome.
take some time off after the election.
Yeah.
We needed a week.
Yeah.
Uh but yeah, and so one thing I will say, cuz yeah, it is, when this episode comes out, it'll be post Thanksgiving. If you get a chance, look up the real story behind
Ah,
Thanksgiving.
yeah.
It's not lovey-dovey like
Yeah.
you have probably been told in schools your whole life. That is not the story. It's actually really, really messed up. There are a lot of messed up things that happen to the Native Americans in this country.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, if you get a chance, just try and look that up. And yeah, definitely check that out. But yeah, so I do love how they embrace the culture. Like in the MCU,
Yeah.
they do a really good job anytime you're getting the background of like a character like that comes from a particular like race of people. They do such a good, they've been doing a really good job, I feel like, integrating their culture
Yeah.
into it,
Yeah.
and this is no different. I really love how the changes they did to it from the comics, because it's, they kind of showed the background of her ancestors, and it
Mhm.
moving through time all the way to her, and showing just how similar they are despite the time difference.
Yeah.
Um, and I also really love that this show really had such a central focus on family. It was funny because as I was watching it, I'm like, I know the meme. I know it's that Thanksgiving is coming up, and I thought it was very interesting how much this show was all about family seeing each other and dealing with
Mm,
each other after
yep.
having issues over time. And I'm like, man, this really fits.
Yeah, I agree. It's definitely all about family. And so so in psychology, and I'm talking about the clinical psychology or any kinds of practicing with people, there's this delicate balance that you have to have. And so when I think of family when it comes to echo, one of the things I love about it is all of the what we call intersectionalities happening. And so you have to be careful of a few things when you think about someone from their cultural perspective or their
Mhm.
racial perspective or ethnicity, any of that stuff, or any demographic kind of thing. Is on the one hand, you want to be aware and you want to respond to someone based on an understanding of how they may be similar or different from your background. And at the same time, you want to be very careful that you don't inadvertently stereotype and treat someone like they are just one reference point about themselves.
Mm.
And then add on top of that, you have these intersections. And so one of the things that I really love is that they hit on family, they hit on all the complicated stuff you're talking about. They hit on all these cool cultural things. They also hit on different people and how each of them expresses themselves culturally, connects to their culture in different ways.
Right.
So, like for example, there's one point where Maya's grandfather has made her a new part of her prosthetic, and he notices she has a reaction to it, and she's like, "I don't like things that are this flashy." But he actually convinces her to. I mean, he doesn't force her to use it, but he explains the meaning from their culture, and
Mhm.
so all these different cool things that you see, but then you have this additional layer of every now and then they point out things about her prosthetic. But what I find incredibly intriguing is her deafness.
Yeah.
And uh, one of the things that I really loved with it is how they showed the people around her. So in this, her mom also is deaf. And so you see the family connecting with them,
Mhm.
and I don't know about you, but it just like warmed my heart into a melting phase to see her whole they've clearly all learned sign language and they've
For
even
her.
kept it up all of these years that they haven't seen her and her mom's been
Yeah.
dead. And they really try to connect. Versus you see her uncle, Kingpin Fisk, he's communicating with her, but there's always something taking the responsibility off of him in a way. And she finally brings it up near the end when she fully realizes, you know what, I did not realize our connection was so different than my other family, because he would have someone translate for him. He'd have an
Mhm.
interpreter, or then he had technology built. And so he she could tell that he cared for her and loved her in the way that he could, but
Mhm.
it wasn't the same as her family. And so
Right.
that was another really cool, just all these pieces, not just her culture, but also her deafness. And then also there's just Maya, because there's also these pieces of her that aren't explained by those facets of her. And it's just her personality and her
Mhm.
family trying to connect with her, even though Maya's a little bit on the renegade side. And
Absolutely.
I loved all those layers coming together, and I think they did a really great job.
Well, I also really do like how, like you said, how her deafness was handled. Uh, you see how her family handled it, and how Kingpin handled it.
Mhm.
And the thing is, it's like you said, you can tell he does care about her. And it
Yes.
was interesting how they showed this, just had a lot of issues on his own that he was dealing with, like with the story with the hammer, and then she goes back in time at one point and helps him with it. it got a little, that last episode got a little confusing for me. It
Keaton's
did.
not a fan of the last episode.
So it's not, so I go,
You
it
don't
just,
have you don't have to love the whole thing. It's okay.
well, it's just one of the, it just kind of came out of left field. I was trying to figure out, I think I was just trying to figure out
It's
what was going on because it's like,
it what
okay, she,
I actually yeah, I googled
yeah.
too afterward where I was like, "What?" It's yeah, it seemed like she was trying to heal him of his past trauma,
And
but
then
then
he
he
was
was
just
fighting
mad.
it.
Yeah. Yeah, he
Yeah, but
was
he's
just,
fighting it,
yeah,
which I mean, was
of
very
course.
all of it very cool
Yeah.
psychologically to me, of course, but you're right. That could in and of itself have been like an entire season.
Yeah, I was like, "Wait, so is she time traveling now?" Like, I just, that was just that part was just
I'll give you that.
really, yeah, it was just, yeah. And but at the same time, like, I still absolutely love this show. I love what they did with it, and I feel like Maya as a character, she grew a lot throughout. And this is something that always makes me laugh in, and it happens a lot in comic book movies. You will have these characters and it's like, okay, they turn over a new leaf, but before they do that, they kill dozens and dozens and dozens of people. And all of a sudden it's
Yeah.
like, well, now that I'm back home and I went to my uncle's skating rink and we worked stuff out, and now
Well, hold
I'm at
on.
the
He's not as wholesome as you made him just sound either.
Absolutely not. But at the same time,
He
I
was
think
more
it's just,
forced and she's doing it of her own accord, but
yeah.
still.
I do just think it was just really funny how they showed her progression. It's like, no, she worked as Kingpin's top enforcer for a long time and killed a
Yeah.
lot of people. And
Which he
then,
points out, he's like, "I didn't force you to do any of that stuff. You didn't fight it at all.
right,
You just went out and killed those people and you knew exactly what was going on." And
right.
that was indeed a fair point.
It really was. And so she's a very interesting character. I really wish this could have gotten a season two because she still has some demons to work out for sure.
Oh yeah.
And I think, and that's what I love. It's that you can get it together while still having plenty of stuff to deal with, you
Oh
know?
god, yeah.
Like
If
that's
you
what,
couldn't, like what's the point of life?
yeah. Yeah. And it kind of just reminds me of how people will have, things like depression or any of the other mental health disorders that we've talked about on this podcast. It's still completely possible to have a regular life
Yep.
and to have a day job and to get along well with family and friends despite these issues. Because at the end
Yep.
of this, you see Maya, she's interacting again with her family. They're sitting down at a picnic table together and seemingly all is well. But there's a lot going on up
Yep.
there. And it's not something, the brain is not something, it's like, oh, it's not easy to just, shut it off.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where it's like you have to honestly really focus to try and get all of New York out of your head and enjoy Oklahoma.
Yeah. It's yeah, there's something to be said for being careful about thinking that, like you said, you need to have it all figured out for things to be okay or
Mhm.
to be I mean, it's okay to constantly be revisiting and reworking and working on yourself. In fact, that's probably a better process than thinking of it as a I'm reaching for this one thing and then I'm done.
Right.
Because what's one of the only constants in life is that things are always changing. Even we as people are constantly developing. There's this really weird, unique thing about the self where you're constantly changing and yet you're always yourself.
Mhm.
That's a really confusing idea if you think about it.
Absolutely.
You're you're the you that was 5 years old, and yet you're absolutely not the you that was 5 years old. How
Right.
weird is that,
That's
right?
a lot.
It's a lot. And so we get caught up, especially if we're dealing with a lot of shit and we look around and it seems like everyone has it all together.
Mhm.
You can have that. you can get stuck in that.
Yes.
And if you have an expectation of what okay looks like, you might not be able to appreciate it when it's knocking at your door. And what's really cool with Maya is, and you can even argue to a certain extent, Fisk fits in this category, except when she picks her family later. Like, then he gets a little murdery. But before that,
He does not handle rejection well.
he
Even in
doesn't handle
in
rejection
Daredevil, he
very well.
didn't. Like, yeah,
No,
he's
he's not
very
good with
interesting
it.
character. I love him.
He's so interesting. I agree. Yeah, so fascinating. But before that, even he might even fit into this category of people accepting her for being hard to live with and hard
Hmm.
to deal with and having all these quirks about herself and eh, you know having someone who, I mean, arguably she has more right than most people to feel out of sorts and like a misfit. Think about all of these demographics about her that make her a very unique sample of
Yes.
people. How many people out
Yes.
there are indigenous
Hmm.
and deaf and have a prosthetic
Right.
and oh, and then add to that, and your family is like part of a crime family.
Yeah.
I mean, think of all of these
On
things
both
that,
sides. Yeah.
of course, she's a loner. When's she ever gonna meet someone like herself where
Right.
all these things line up? And so people, I think, they warm up to her and they're compassionate for her and her situation. I mean, don't get me wrong, they're standing up to her and they're setting boundaries and they're telling her when things are and aren't okay, but they're also still there, even despite all of these things that she's doing that can make it really hard.
Hmm. Yeah.
So yeah,
That's very
I
true.
really, yeah, I really like everything that goes on here. And then take out the family, but also you see how she is you also see how she's supported by her ancestors. And one of the things that I've actually really grown to appreciate and want to look into more, that at least if it's in some of my cultural background, I haven't really been taught it. It
Hmm.
is, I really respect this focus on ancestors and generational knowledge and wisdom and um energy,
Yes.
because and you see it so well here where, I mean, she literally gets has influences from past strong women in her family that even brings power at times. But even aside from that, you see all these ways that she's led and guided and can find some peace of mind and a sense of direction, not just based on herself and what's happened with her family around her, but as a descendant and the ripples of time and history. And it's just a really cool thing that we've done such a disservice
Hmm.
to cultures like indigenous cultures by essentially trying to wipe out those kinds of things, because it's so powerful. Especially, you and I were talking about the election. Like, if you have times where you start questioning things or your foundation feels like it's shaken in one way or the other,
Hmm.
one of the things that can really help ground you is thinking about all the people that have come before you and the ones that can come after you, and how you all can move toward this thing together that if you are one person, you can't do. And
Yes.
so yeah, I really am drawn into that piece as well. It's not just family around her now, but being a descendant in the ancestors.
It really did, because as someone is that loves genetics, uh did master's work with genetics, like I absolutely love it. I've also I it really made me think about inherited traits, like throughout,
Yeah.
like as I watched it. And this is something that's still being talked about and studied a lot now, the idea of epigenetics and how like
Mhm.
certain things can get passed down
Yep.
through generations that isn't necessarily something that is a genetic trait. Like
Yep.
they're studying like if trauma can be passed down through generations and things like that. And it's still, this is not me in any way saying like, oh, this is true and here's the hard research. But it did make me kind of think about that because there's so
Absolutely.
much work being done with epigenetics and like
Yes.
it's just it's kind of controversial right now because there have been some pseudoscience that's been
Uh,
thrown around in there, but at the same time, there's also been some really good research
there
done.
has been research that
Yeah.
suggests, like, for example, um, people's weight and how they hold on to weight and what it can look like based on the different generations. Or yeah, they've looked at trauma
Hmm.
and what people's reactions. And these are really complicated things to try and
Right.
research. And the longer we have the ability to test it, it helps to actually be able to test it as you move through the generations. So I bet,
Yes.
in a few decades we're going to know even more.
Yes.
But
A-
I so agree with you. And this is, look, I'm just going to say it. As a white person, to my fellow white people, sometimes we are the worst. And how we are potentially the absolute worst. And I'm not only talking to white people. I'm talking about us white healthcare people. You know how we can be the worst? We will go up to all these other cultures and we'll say, what you're doing is pseudoscience. What you're doing is make believe and made up and this, that, and the other. And you need to believe in Western medicine and this, that, and the other. And then we find a way to study it and test it. And then what do you know? All of a sudden, we're trying to do yoga and we're trying to do mindfulness and we're trying to incorporate like things about your diet, which by the way has to do with herbs and other things. And so all this to say is, yeah, things like epigenetics, I feel like it's essentially catching up to things that a lot of other cultures have been saying for a while. It's just now, granted, it's helpful to look and see because sometimes we believe things and standardize things to see what's actually creating the cause and effect that right? Test the
right.
cause and effect because there could be other factors we're not thinking about. But on the flip side, we have a real bad habit of essentially taking credit for things when we can prove it, when other people have been saying these things all along.
Right. Yeah.
We're
But
awful.
it's funny because you did mention yoga and immediately I was like, "Oh wow. Yeah, that's true because yoga like hey, I think it's one of the branches of Hinduism, and and it originated out of like northern India, and now you see it's been appropriated heavily. Like,
So,
yeah,
psychologists, we have not historically been, we're not necessarily better than all the other healthcare professions. So, look, here's the unfortunate truth is that all of the healthcare professions, probably, if you look back far enough, have done some pretty terrible things or have data and things that they do based on terrible things that have been done to
yes,
people,
absolutely.
or writing other people off and then taking credit for it in a different way,
Hmm.
or all of these different things. So
Yes,
um I can create a list, but we don't have time for that. But in focusing in though in the spirit of Native American Heritage Month, actually in I think it was 2023, the American Psychological Association actually issued an apology on behalf of the American Psychological Association to uh, Native American groups, essentially acknowledging the fact that we have not treated you all well. Because there have been times where, look, science is great, the people behind the science not always so great.
right,
So there are times where we've said some pretty terrible things about indigenous groups based on research, and that research isn't good, or
right.
how we interpret it isn't good, and it's very skewed. There's been not nice commentary on indigenous people within psychology, and it's not just this group, but I'm just focusing in on this one given the spirit of today. And so, I think acknowledgement of that kind of stuff is so important because uh, uh, nowadays we go, man, no, people need to just trust their medical provider. Nah, well, there's a reason people don't. There's all of these histories, which you don't have to look too far back. And yeah, yoga's a great example. Steal shit. And then we tell you to do it the white way. We do. We say, "Hey, now do it the Western way, or do it this cleaned up medical way." When why can't we just let people do it the way that makes sense to them? It's a shame that we try and make everybody the same. Let our different
Well,
cultures figuring it out and working together. That's what's cool.
and the thing is too, I've always tried to have like a mantra where it's like anytime I'm I want to know more about another culture, whether it's race or religion, gender, whatever it is, I try and talk to the source. I
Yeah.
try and find someone from that demographic,
Mm,
right? I try and find like for I remember for example, when we covered uh Miss Miss Marvel,
yeah.
and they talked about the partitioning of India, like when it became India and
Mhm.
Pakistan. I went and talked to my friends, and they told me about their grandparents that like actually dealt with
Yeah.
that and were there during it, and it was so fascinating to hear. Same thing, like I remember years ago when what's God, it wasn't that long ago, and it's still issues we're dealing with now. But when the George Floyd shooting happened,
Yeah.
I had a white friend call me up and it's like, Keaton, how does this make you feel? Like, I know
Yeah.
I did not grow up being afraid of police. Is this how you feel all the time? And like, but it was a
Yeah.
heavy conversation. But at the same time, it's always a really good idea to
Yeah.
go to the source. If you're a guy and you don't understand the Me Too movement, don't talk to another dude. Don't. Just don't. Okay? They don't get it. I promise you, right? Like
See,
like
this is why I love
and
talking to you because it's actually I see this all the time, in a variety of different avenues, but I for some reason it can be really hard to get out of and social media, all the algorithms is making it even worse. But it's hard
oh yeah.
to get outside of your norm and say, okay, so here's something I'm wondering about. Where's a source? And you do want to be careful, like I try and be mindful when I come to you about stuff that hits on, say, being black,
Mhm.
or we've had conversations where you talk about what it's like being pulled over as you versus me being pulled over in our hometown,
Right.
and at the same time, being careful not to force someone to create all the answers for you. Also looking
Yes.
for,
That's a
like,
good
for
point.
example, that website that I talked about for Choctaw Nation, or there's actually a Society of Indian Psychologists. And so that's for Native American, Alaska Native psychologists. And so if you're wondering about things, it's also helpful to go to the source in other ways where you're reaching out to multiple people. But also, what are things that are out there? Because some people have probably done the work, and we also want to be careful about, so going to people I think can be so validating because it's recognition and acknowledgement of this part of who you are, but you have to be careful that you're not leaning into creating more work for someone. How making sure it's mutually beneficial in some way I think can be useful, or just not
Right.
making sure you're not constantly pulling from that source, because sometimes that can happen too. But I think what you're talking about is absolutely key, because we like when I was watching the show and I was like, this is such a great representation. Wait, is it?
Yeah.
We have to ask those questions because
Mhm.
things can look really good. Things can
Mhm.
look really
Look
good,
how great
and
we did. Right.
Yeah, look at how great we did. Yay! And then you come to find out later some fatal flaws in it. And by the way, even Echo, as great as it is, generations down the line, how we look at things and how we're accepting, there might be things that we're like, ooh, we wouldn't do that this way now. Kind of like, 90s strong women, you had to be more masculine. And now it's like, well, now you can be a woman and wear pink, right? And so part of it too is these things just morph and change over time.
Right.
But also we don't get everything right all of the time, and so checking your sources is always handy.
And even going off like you said, like especially with in indigenous people, but also with someone with the with like she's because she's deaf. I
Mm.
love that how in the show how often they showed things from her perspective
Oh, I
and you
loved
heard
that.
things
So cool.
from her perspective, like how she would pick up the rhythm of people's dancing by looking at
Yes.
it and instead of being
And
able
she
to
might have been like
necessarily
feeling
hear
it
it.
through the ground or something instead.
Yes.
Hmm.
I love that they did that, and I'm not gonna lie, at the beginning of the show when they showed her fighting Daredevil, I was
Yeah.
like, "This is so good." Because because it's like, okay, he's blind, she's deaf, and they're just, like,
Oh
going
yeah.
toe to toe
That's
with
another
each
thing
other.
I
It
love.
was
You
awesome.
know me, I love showing some kick-ass people with a disability. It's
Oh, yeah.
awesome. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
You wanna know something really funny? So, I was watching the show, and yeah, they do all these cool things with using sound so you can get more of her perspective, which is so awesome. I love
Mhm.
that. There was one point when our speakers went out, and I didn't know for, like, 5 minutes because I thought I was like, "Oh, this is a longer period of not having the sound on, but okay." And then eventually I was like, "No, I think something's wrong." So I had to turn off the TV and back on, but I thought that was really funny.
Yeah. Um, and one other thing this show did, I really loved that they did. It showed a lot of people letting go of anger. It showed
Mm.
a
Mhm.
lot of that, whether it
Oh, yeah.
was Maya and her grandma or
Yep.
Maya and her cousins. It really did a good job showing all of that, like how you can just hold on to it
Yep.
and not only hold on to it, but not know the full story, not
Yes.
understand the full reasoning because she
I was
always
just
felt
thinking that.
like her grandma just straight up abandoned her and deserted
Yep.
her when really on the other side of that, her grandma was absolutely heartbroken and
Yep.
couldn't even be around Maya because of how much she reminded her of her
Yeah.
daughter that she lost. Two completely different perspectives. One can be completely it and but
Yeah.
what's so interesting about it, both of them are right.
Yes.
Maya essentially did feel abandoned and was abandoned,
Yes.
but it's all about finding out that reasoning. Sometimes the
Yep.
why can go so far for someone
It's true.
when you look
Yeah.
at actions and it's like, okay, this
Especially because Maya was so hurt by her mother dying that I
right,
think understanding that her grandmother was Chula was going through a similar thing from the opposite side.
right.
Um I think that tied them together where absolutely Maya was right. She was the kid, figure it out. And also she got it. Sometimes you just can't. And I think that in reconnecting with her family and having those conversations that were very tough and even took some time, sometimes she had to be forced into the
Oh yeah.
conversations. People would just be like, I'm throwing you at this other person, you don't have a choice,
Which
or
I don't like, but
don't love, but
yeah.
it happened. And the thing is that she needed to gain more perspective on what was happening from their ends to start teasing apart. Oh, now I see how Fisk, I thought he was like them in terms of what his love for me was, what
Mhm.
what his connection to me was. But now I'm seeing a difference,
Right.
and in a way where these people have hurt me, but we can repair it versus this person has hurt me and I need distance.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
and that was really, it was a really good perspective. And again, her relationship with Kingpin is also incredibly interesting because he is a character. God, we could probably just do an entire episode just about.
I'm surprised in our villains season we didn't do Fisk
We forgot about him. We did. We
because
we
he's
did.
so interesting. And what's his name? Does such a good job.
Vincent
I was,
D'Onofrio. Oh my God.
yeah,
Yes.
so good.
I could just listen to him just talk all day. Like he just, the way that he speaks is like, it would seem we are at a disadvantage. Like it's just like just hearing him just talk all the time. I could just listen to, I want to hear him
I
like,
wonder if he has any audiobooks.
right. I want to hear him read a Waffle House menu. Like, get it with bacon or sausage. Like I could just listen.
That was pretty
I could
good. All
listen to,
right.
I would just listen to him talk all day. I absolutely love it. But yeah, but his relationship with Maya is also interesting because there is clearly love there, but he does not know how to, he's definitely suffering from like a lack of emotional control, it seems like.
There's a lot
Uh
going on for
lot
him.
going on. A lot going on.
And yeah, he having anger issues is a understatement. You're talking about all this anger and people working through it, and actually at the end of the show they show that he's not there yet.
Hmm.
So other people were able to work through their anger. He wasn't able to. And now granted, Maya tried to force that healing onto him and you see it not work. And that's really
Right.
interesting. And actually with PTSD treatment, for example, we did a PTSD episode recently with Supernatural,
Hmm.
and we talked about how effective that treatment is. But you know what's not effective is taking someone who's been through trauma, which usually means things out of your control that happened to you, and then forcing someone to do something that can actually like add to the reverberations of the trauma. Versus if you're going to do the trauma work, you want someone to choose it for themselves. And so
Right.
he kind of had this healing thing forced on him and he fought back. And and then he got rejected, didn't handle it well, and they suggest, okay, well now he's going for mayor. He's gonna look for that loyalty on a bigger scale. He's gonna
Right.
look for that connection to people in a different way.
Yeah, he's looking
He's
for
still chasing.
acceptance. Yeah, he wants acceptance for, and despite being different, you know. And on the other end of that, Maya's found it. Like her
Yeah.
family completely, like they might not like her background, they might not like what she's done in the past, but they
Heck,
are
she
right
brought
there.
murderers to take them
Oh
out.
my God, she nearly turned their town upside down. It was wild. Yeah, I
Did.
was like, oof. Because I was,
Woman
yeah,
wanted to be queen pin.
yeah,
She's not an innocent little girl here.
nope.
And to her family's credit, they're not they're not using denial to get over their anger and their pain and their hurt. They're
Because
not
they know
saying,
they're not
"Oh, look
innocent
at
either.
Maya, she's so sweet and cute." No, they are looking at her eyes wide open and they're
Hmm.
finding a way to acknowledge her, accept her, set limits when they need to. A few people give her some talking tos, but they know who they're dealing with.
Yeah, absolutely. And so yeah, I really did enjoy uh this show. It did a lot with not a lot of time. Like I said, like you said, they're short, they're pretty short episodes, like maybe 35, 45 minute episodes, and only five of them. But they
I mean, if it's
managed to get a
45 minutes,
lot
that's
done.
including credits, which we know with MCU are forever
Oh my
long.
God.
So, I mean, take at least 5 minutes off right there.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what, though? I think that's why coming back to it, I was so shocked it was so few episodes and so short because it's so chock full of good stuff
Hmm.
that yeah, I looking back, I thought that yeah, I thought there were a lot more episodes.
Yeah, it was really good. I enjoyed it. Definitely check it out. But also, I just, um, yeah, I really thought Maya was a very interesting character. But I also just thought they were such an interesting family. Like
Yeah.
seeing how all of them interacted with Maya. Like she
Mhm.
had a different relationship with every single member of her family, which is the reality, right?
Yep.
Like it is the
Yep.
reality. Like your cousin, your grandma, your like the other cousin, the guy and his dog, they were great by the way. I love
Biscuit.
yeah, I love them.
Biscuits, yeah, he was
Yeah.
cute.
And so
Also, though, we haven't talked about brief shout out to Chula and Scully's story, the tiny little subplot, her
oh
grandparents,
yes.
who at so when the rift happens, it seems like they divorced or separated or whatever. And then you see them slowly coming back together, and it's just the cutest thing. So it
Yeah.
makes me so happy.
Well, I also love that he was always just kind of waiting patiently. Like
Yeah.
it was almost like he knew what she was going through and he was just kind of biding his time like, look, I'll always be here for her, but I'm also not gonna
Yeah.
yeah.
You know what? I think this is not based on any psychological science, so let's be very clear. But this is a long line of very strong women, like
Yes.
very strong women
Yes.
through the ancestors back to the beginning of the Choctaw Nation. And when there's such strength, I think having that quiet, patient strength that you underestimate, you don't realize is there as like a counterpoint
Hmm.
can be so helpful. Because I totally agree with you. Scully, he's there, he's waiting, he sees what she's needing, he creates a calm, and he keeps her sewing machine, hoping that she'll come back for it one day.
Yeah.
And the way they talk about it's probably been decades. And he cleaned
Yeah.
it, he took care of it, he had it ready for her. He is that calm, patient foundation that she can stand on as the strong woman of the family, which yeah, I really liked that.
Hmm. Yes, definitely. But yeah, I really did enjoy it. I loved seeing her kind of come back to her roots and more than that actually make a choice like okay
Mm,
these are two vastly different roads I could head
yep.
down right now and both are technically family. Kingpin did
Mhm.
do have a good bit in raising her like for sure.
And he
uh
even offered to help her become a queen pin.
it was like I'll give you what you want, just come home.
Yep.
Like he was yeah, and I do
After she
believe
shot him in the eye, y'all.
yes, which I'm trying to figure out how he lived. I don't really get. Yeah, they didn't. Whatever. Comic books. Like,
He was too villainous to die.
right. He was too. Yeah,
Yeah.
his voice was too great. Like, yeah, it was. He's not going anywhere. But yeah, she shot him, and he was still like, I get it. Like,
Yeah, that you know what? I gotta say, as skewed and unhealthy as it is, that's it's incredible that he was like, "You tried to kill me, and I can relate to you and understand where that's coming from and respect it
yeah,
and still want to be family for you."
yeah,
So, I mean, I got to give him props for that piece. It's too bad it's all centered around like, "Hey, let's be evil and villainous together
right.
and I'm giving you a choice but not really cuz I
Yes,
mean, your choice is join me or death, but you know."
I do. I did like they did such a good job, like showing him be charismatic and like a decent uncle to her. And I'm like, oh wow, yeah, I'm
I
starting to
know.
like him. And then they'll make sure to do something to remind you, no, no, don't forget, he's an evil bastard. Like when he
Yeah.
killed the translator that she had.
Oh,
It's like, oh
yeah.
well, sorry. And it's like, wait, did you just wow. So they did a really good job of that. And so I'm glad Maya made the choice she did and just went back to Oklahoma.
Thanks for nerding out with us. I'm clinical psychologist Dr. Amelia Brown.
And I'm educator and comic aficionado Keeden Hopkins. Check out my TV and movie reviews on YouTube at Team JBS. Check out our website at bat-therapy.com, our Bat Therapy YouTube channel, and follow us on social media. And don't forget our Patreon page at patreon.com/battherapy. See you next week. Same bat time, same bat channel.